get about Israel during their 430 years in Egypt? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Exodus on walking through the Bible.
The glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Exodus chapter 2. We're going to be reading from verses 16 to 25. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Exodus chapter 2, beginning at verse 16. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water, and they filled the troughs to water their father's flock. Then the shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. When they came to Reuel, their father, he said, "How is it that you have come so soon today?" And they said, "An Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds, and he also drew enough water for us and watered the flock." So he said to his daughters, "And where is he? Why is it that you have left the man? Call him that he may eat bread." Then Moses was content to live with the man, and he gave Zipporah, his daughter, to Moses. And she bore him a son. He called his name Gershom, for he said, "I have been a stranger in a foreign land." Now it happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt died. Then the children of Israel groaned because of their bondage, and they cried out, and their cry came up to God because of their bondage. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them. In our last episode, we had Moses killing an Egyptian who was abusing one of the Hebrew slaves. Moses thought his actions would put him in the good graces of the Hebrew people, for he believed that he would lead this people out of bondage. That wasn't how the Hebrews saw it, though, for when Moses came the next day and saw 2 Hebrew men fighting, the one asked Moses, "Who made him a prince and judge over Israel?" Was he now going to kill the man just as he had done to the Egyptian the previous day? Word got back to Pharaoh what Moses had done, so Moses had to flee. He came to Midian, which is in what we would call today western Saudi Arabia, situated near the Gulf of Aqaba, that eastern finger of the Red Sea that separates the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt. When Moses came to Midian, he sat down by a well. In verse 16, we're told that the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. That this man was a priest should not surprise us, for this is still in the patriarchal age, when the heads of families could act as priests and offer sacrifices. And although idolatry and false worship had swept through much of that area and up through Canaan, it appears from chapter 18 that this priest actually served the true God. Or if he didn't when Moses arrived, he did by the time Moses left. The priest's daughters came to draw water from the troughs to water their father's flock, but the nearby shepherds drove them away. Now, as we've seen already in this chapter, it is well within the character of Moses to help those who are being afflicted when they need it. So he drove the shepherds away and helped water the flock of the priest of Midian. This story sort of reminds us of the story when Jacob met Rachel in Genesis 29, although one of the differences is that Moses doesn't fall in love with one of these women, even though he would later end up marrying one of them. Once they were done watering the flocks, the daughters returned to their father, who was named Reuel. He asked them how they could have returned so soon. The daughters tell him that an Egyptian delivered them from the shepherds and helped them water the flocks. That Moses was described as an Egyptian and not a Hebrew shouldn't surprise us either, for he was raised and educated as an Egyptian, so mistaking him for an Egyptian is not out of the question. Reuel basically asks his daughters, "And where are your manners? For why isn't this man with you so that we can all eat together?" Eating together is a sign of fellowship and friendship, something that was true in Bible times and something that is true today. Moses came to Reuel and was content to live with him. Zipporah, one of the priest's 7 daughters, was given as a wife to Moses. Moses and Zipporah had a son and named him Gershom, which means stranger in a foreign land. At verse 23, we then get a break in the story. A certain amount of time had passed, which from other passages we know to be 40 years. We find out that the Pharaoh of Egypt, whom Moses had escaped from, had died. Although we didn't mention it, it is likely that the Pharaoh that Moses escaped from is not the same Pharaoh of chapter 1 and the beginning of chapter 2, simply because of Moses being 40 years old when he fled Egypt. The Pharaoh, though, that was now in power was like the ones before him in his brutal treatment of Israel. It was so bad that the children of Israel cried out to God because of their bondage. God heard their cries, and verse 24 says that he remembered the covenant he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Had God forgotten about Israel after these 430 years in Egypt? From man's perspective, it certainly looked that way, but recall in Genesis 15:13 that God had told Abraham that his descendants would be servants in Egypt and would be afflicted by them for 400 years. That period of time was now up, and so God brought to the forefront of his mind the covenant he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and would raise up someone to deliver Israel out of bondage. We'll get to that in the next episode. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 to 6, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
I'm not ashamed.
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.
Of his cross.